Hello, and welcome to this presentation on the Access Research Study. Access stands for Achieving Competitive Customized Employment Through Specialized Services. I'm Dr. Tammy Jorgensen-Smith. I'm with the University of South Florida with the College of Behavioral and Community Sciences and the Department of Child and Family Studies. Okay, so we have a few objectives for today. The primary thing that we're going to be doing today, I'm going to present information about the Access study, its purpose, and the current status of the research study. We're going to review the basic elements of the customized employment process, which are key to the Access study. We're going to present results from the Access open trial and specify lessons learned and next steps. So the principal investigators on the study are myself and my colleague, Dr. Tina Dillahunt-Aspiaga. We also have two doctoral students who serve as research assistants, Devaney Ching and Amanda Weston. We also have several community partners that we'd like to acknowledge, and the other statisticians and qualitative scientists on our project. So Henny and Shin and Wei Wang are the biostatisticians, and Lodi Roher and Flandra Isamali are the qualitative scientists. Our community partners are the Center for Autism and Related Disorders, or CARD, the Learning Academy, the GROW Group, and the Diversity Initiative. And all of those are community-based organizations that serve individuals with complex disabilities in obtaining competitive employment within their communities. Okay, so what is Access? Access is a federal National Institutes of Mental Health grant that was awarded in 2017 with the purpose of testing the customized employment process for its utility and improving competitive integrative employment outcomes for adults age 22 plus with autism spectrum disorders. Now, NIMH at the same time also put out a mechanism for testing different types of strategies to help individuals with autism spectrum disorders to become engaged within their communities for transition age youth. So there were two different mechanisms, one for transition age youth and one for adults. And so since our center particularly focuses on working with the adult population, we're going to be working with adults that are 22 plus. Okay. So Access's vision is to open doors to competitive integrative employment for people with complex disabilities who have not been successful through traditional vocational rehabilitation services. And you notice that I say complex disabilities and not just autism. And the reason for that is Access, the larger vision is to utilize this intervention for any individual with a complex disability who has not been successful in obtaining competitive integrative employment through traditional vocational rehabilitation services. So our mission is to develop a universal, user-friendly intervention for delivering consistently high-quality, customized employment services with fidelity to an evidence-based model. So just a little bit of a review on customized employment for those of you who may not be familiar with it. This is the definition that the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act has, and it's kind of wordy, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about customized employment in a way that it is a little bit easier to picture. I'm a visual person, so to picture it. So customized employment strategies are helpful in many aspects of life, whether a person has a disability or not. Many people use career assessments and other methods to identify their career interests and talents. We use personal and professional connections to find jobs. When needed, we request flexible work schedules or modifications to accommodate further education, families, or other commitments. These same tasks don't necessarily always come as easy for some people. Some people have challenges such as limited communication skills, complex physical disabilities, cognitive processing issues, severe and persistent mental health issues, social behavioral issues, and dual diagnoses. For example, people who have limited speech may not be able to respond quickly to assessment questions such as those in typical interviews that take place during traditional vocational evaluations. They may also have a difficult time expressing their interest and explaining their talents. Work environments are often not designed to be sensitive to sensory issues such as temperature intolerances, noise levels, and lighting. Many employers are not focused on unique interpersonal and learning styles, not because they're not willing to or able to, but they just don't know, they're not aware of the need to be. So customized employment strategies open doors for people who have not been successful in achieving competitive integrative employment goals due to the complexity of their disability. It's not a new concept or a process, as these strategies have been demonstrated to be successful for decades. Like many innovative approaches, it takes time to get to the point of systems change. As for customized employment, that time has come. And we now have the opportunity to utilize these strategies to improve successful rehabilitation rates for vocational rehabilitation consumers with the most complex disabilities. So those who have been sitting on caseloads for year after year and not being successful, not because they don't have talents. Everybody has talents and skills that they can translate into a productive, competitive, integrative employment opportunity. It's just that sometimes the tools that we've had available don't work as well to help those individuals be successful in those environments. Okay. So, the socio-ecological approach. The customized employment process is grounded in socio-ecological theory in that it acknowledges the complex interplay between a person and the environment. It emphasizes the importance of person-environment fit, as well as the diverse systems that influence human functioning. It takes into consideration the unique aspects of each person, such as a person's age, type of disability, functional capacities, disposition, and interaction style, while also recognizing contextual factors such as living arrangements, geographical location, support systems, connections, and resources to help facilitate an employment outcome that aligns with the individual's interests and talents while considering conditions that may impact successful long-term employment. Okay, so this is a diagram that we have developed. Hopefully you can see it, it's a little bit small, but of the customized employment process to kind of show that, first of all, the job seeker is the central component of the process. And that person is involved in every part of the process. So there are major components of the of the customized employment process that start with the first, on the top there with the discovery process, where the person facilitating this process works with the job seeker and a person-centered team, and spends time with that person and the person who and the people who know that person best to work to really get to know that person. So spending time with them in their home, in their community, in novel and familiar activities to develop the second piece, which is a vocational profile. Excuse me, that is the product of the discovery process. Okay, so it's a robust narrative snapshot of the individual that includes, through the process of discovery, through spending 16 to 24 on average hours in discovery with the individual and with individuals who know that person well, the facilitator is able to develop this rich narrative snapshot that takes their talents, interests, and conditions for employment and lays them out in a non-evaluative way to help develop the next piece, the customized employment planning, where a blueprint is developed, or essentially an action plan. So I like to speak about it as like a bridge. So discovery does not in itself equal employment. It's just the information that you need to help facilitate successful employment that aligns with the interests and skills of the individual. So you need that bridge to get to employment. So with that bridge, you have a customized employment planning meeting where the team comes together all the different stakeholders. You try to bring the vocational rehabilitation counselor and other support systems into that meeting to develop an action plan for getting from what you know to the outcome that you're looking for, which is the customized employment outcome. At the bottom there you see a portfolio, a career portfolio, which usually will contain a visual resume. These are marketing tools that help show the employer that the individual can do the essential functions of the job. So for instance, if a person goes to an interview and they're nonverbal, and the typical interview format, that's not going to work very well. So how can that person inform that employer that he or she is able to do the job? If you have videos and photos of the person doing the essential functions of the job to share with the employer, that can fill that gap and fill that need. Next is job development and negotiation, where basically you work with the employers to identify ways that you can best help that accommodate that individual so that they have an even playing field and are able to do their job and to express their skills and talents. So for instance, I'll give you an example of negotiation, customized job development and negotiation. So say an individual is really, really talented when it comes to data entry, organization, things like that, but the individual is not verbal and has not had much experience with exchanging money. So if that person was to go to work in a retail store, that person may, if the job description says that the clerks will do all of these things, straighten the store, enter information into the database, ring up customers, answer questions for customers. With that job description, this person would not be able to work in that particular position. But if the job is carved in a way that the individual can do the organization, do the data entry, help with those elements of the job, that gives other people within the business the opportunity to spend more time on sales, which is typically preferred, which can tend to raise morale within the system. So you always present it from how can this benefit the business, because customized employment is using the talents and skills of the individual to fill a need in the business. So always present it from a business perspective. And then of course accommodation and supports. And we're going to need to add another one. We're going to be modifying this model to include job retention services, because what we're seeing is that most of the models that are out there do not have the funding or the resources available for the post-employment services. And this isn't everywhere, but it's pervasive enough to need to start addressing that. Sometimes a person has gone through this whole process and needs, they're able to get a job, and then after the first 90 days or so, their support system kind of falls away. So two things that we do is we develop natural support systems within the business, but also it's important to have people, at least contacts for the employer and for the job seeker or for the employee and the family sometimes, to be able to problem solve if something comes up and they don't know what to do, so that person can retain that employment. So now that we've covered a little bit about customized employment, we're going to talk about the Access intervention. Access protocolizes the customized employment process. So basically it's a user-friendly system that allows for a standardized, consistent method of delivery of customized employment services. And to facilitate that, we have developed a fidelity checklist. And what a fidelity checklist is I'll talk a little bit about the benchmarks, the quality checklist in a moment, but it basically helps to ensure that the person who is the practitioner or the provider is being comprehensive and following all the steps that are necessary to complete the intervention the way that it was designed. We are working to establish an evidence base that we know that for decades of working with customized employment strategies that they work, but we haven't established an evidence base in research yet. And also we are looking to generalize beyond just autism spectrum disabilities, but also to anybody who has a complex disability who could utilize and benefit from customized employment services. Okay, I think it's important to delineate between evidence-based practice and best practice, because a lot of times I see that and hear that people will mix up the two terms. So to have an evidence base, to be able to call something an evidence-based best practice, it needs to have a research base. It has to be shown effective through rigorous scientific evaluation. The Access study is doing that. There are other studies that I have seen that have been going on, but not enough of them yet. We need to keep doing this and show that customized employment is consistent and works well, so that we can get the systems changed, the policies changed. We've already started to do that using the best practice model, which is the generally accepted standardized techniques, methods, or processes that have proven themselves over time. So customized employment is definitely a best practice. We are working hard to make sure that it's an evidence-based best practice. So there are 3 specific aims for this study. We are looking to refine the Access training, intervention, and study protocols in testing the Access intervention. We want to look into feasibility and acceptability in an open trial. That's what we're going to talk about today, and I'll explain what that means in just a moment. And then in the second phase, which we have already started, we're going to be examining the feasibility, acceptability, and preliminary efficacy of Access relative to usual care in a randomized controlled pilot of 30 subjects. Okay? So it won't all be this researchy, but this is a research project. So here is just a figure of the methodology. Like I said, we're going to be looking at phase 1 today, which is the open trial, 10 people that we went through this customized employment process without randomization. This is everybody got to participate in iteratively from all the stakeholders. We got their feedback and made improvements to the intervention. And now we are in phase 2. We're just starting phase 2 where we're recruiting 30 people. 15 of them will go through the Access intervention, and the other 15 will do usual care, and we'll do some comparison as to how Access holds up based on what people are doing just currently. So our expected outcomes for this study are to gain convincing evidence of the feasibility, acceptability, and preliminary efficacy of the Access intervention. So in simplest terms, we are looking to see if this customized employment intervention results in the primary outcome of competitive integrative employment. We're also looking at a couple of other variables to see if going through the customized employment process will increase an individual's self-determination and an individual's quality of life. Okay. So, the Access open trial. So we recruited, you're going to see a couple of different numbers here, and that's because you over-recruit because you know that some people may not meet the inclusion criteria or may not make it through the process. So we actually recruited 13 people looking for a sample of 10, okay? So the goal of phase 1 was to make sure that we tested the feasibility and acceptability. Feasibility means we can recruit the number of people that we need to recruit in terms of are people going to come and participate in the study? So basically, with the open trial, that was a definite yes. We were able to recruit 13 people, and we maintained the goal of 10 people. Okay? Acceptability criteria is whether or not once a person enters the study, did they make it all the way through the study? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the acceptability of the open trial and as we go through this. All right, so for those of you who are familiar with the customized employment process, you know that it's non-evaluative, so scores are not typically a part of that in any way, shape, or form. For research purposes. Now, the National Institutes of Health just started providing funding for people who have autism spectrum disabilities because it's become a big enough issue that they consider it a public health concern. And so we are really excited to have this opportunity. But one of the things that they require in order to fund projects is a specific level of rigor. So certain types of studies, randomized controlled trials are, excuse me, the gold standard in terms of rigor. So not necessarily always the best thing, as we'll talk about in the lessons learned, but also they like to see mixed methods. So not just qualitative information as is captured through the discovery process and part of the essence of the customized employment process. We did mixed methods to gather some information on individuals pre and post intervention. So demographics, basic demographics you can see on the screen are age, gender, race, ethnicity, work history, education level, socioeconomic status, and living situation. Risk factors, cognitive functioning and severity of autism. And then functional outcomes, we looked at the severity of social impairments, so their social participation, self-determination, and quality of life. And of course, our primary outcome is competitive integrative employment. So I told you about the benchmarks equality checklist. This is a fidelity measure that is basically a checklist, and it facilitates training. So we use it as a training tool as we're teaching practitioners how to implement the customized employment process. And they can use it after they're trained as guidance for implementing to make sure that it breaks it down into the different components of what you would do. So there's pre-planning, there's the initial meeting with the individual, there's interviewing, there's the familiar activities, the novel activities. So all of those, that's just for discovery. This goes all the way through the full process to the end where you're providing those follow-up support services. So it's a fidelity checklist is basically designed to promote adherence to a particular model. So the practitioners what they're doing with this is not only do they check whether or not they do each step in the process, but if they say no or that they partially did something, they're asked to document any omissions, additions, and adaptations that are made during the implementation process. And that helps us to better refine the process, to see where the sticky parts are, and to help us to just continue to improve the customized employment process and the access model. Okay. So here's some of the data that we collected through the open trial. You see N equals 12. We only had one person who was not eligible. So we actually beat our recruitment goal of 10. So you can see that is characteristic with autism. We had more males than females. We did our best to oversample females just to try to make sure that we had some females in the study, and we were able to get a quarter of those individuals to be female. You can see the other information pertaining to co-occurring disorders, education level, work history. And as I go through some of the results, you'll see kind of how this comes into play. Okay. So, when we gathered the results from the open trial, the primary outcome of competitive integrative employment was very important. Now, before I talk to you about this, I have to explain what happened with our sample. And I had said the acceptability criteria is how many people do enough people complete the whole process. When we started this process, we are doing things as close to the way customized employment is traditionally employed as possible to help make sure that this is something that can be used in the real world and not just in a research lab setting. So we are working with community-based providers. Current existing community-based providers are providing these services to real individuals who are looking for jobs within their communities. Okay, so we had 12 people that completed all the baseline. We had 2 practitioners assigned to the open trial. One of the practitioners received a promotion during the period of time, and so she was only able to take 2 of our 5 participants. The other was not effective as a practitioner, and this happens when you go outside of a lab setting where you don't have control. We did not hand select. We wanted it to match real world as much as possible, so we didn't hand select our practitioners. So 5 of the people who were assigned to that one practitioner all said that they couldn't work with that particular practitioner. So that limited our sample. So if you look at the fact that in total we had 7 people, the five that were to be referred to that individual, plus 2 additional people who met the criteria who were recruited. 4 of them completed the access process. So that's 4 out of 7 is decent. All 4 of them, this is what's more important, all 4 of them attained competitive employment within their communities. I did make a note that one of the 4 gained the employment before engaging in the intervention. He just happened to have been working towards it beforehand, and he received a job offer, so we only claimed 3 of those. But I included some of the employment information for these individuals. 5 people altogether have become employed throughout this study. I put the most recent data. Actually 2 individuals became self-employed. One is a game developer. He has a contract with a gaming company. He works about 25 hours per week, and he gets 50% of the profits of the sales of his games. There's another person who's self-employed doing health and wellness, selling health and wellness products for 17.5 hours per week. An individual's in a full-time position in financial accounting. There's another person who was offered a position in a hotel but ended up turning it down for personal reasons. It happened to be health reasons, and they may go back to that position once their health stabilizes. And unfortunately, the 5th person, the reason that we don't count, we only count 4 up top, is this individual had very complex disabilities and a lot of co-occurring conditions, and he was offered a position within a restaurant, but he got ill and passed away, unfortunately. So that's a very sad thing that does happen sometimes when you're working with people with really complex disabilities. So now, with the sample size, the small sample size that we have, we're showing this data more to show trends than to show any kind of significant outcomes. We don't have enough data to say, yes, these secondary outcomes are met, but we do have some trends and some preliminary data that show that it's looking good for it. So the first three are they're subcomponents of a self-determination measure. And basically, there was a medium effect size, but it's not significant based on the small sample size. But the biostatisticians are telling us that it is very likely that it's going to be significant with a larger sample size when we have enough to power this sample. With the other two, the quality of life, you can see it's not a huge increase, but once again, we don't have enough numbers to say significance. We can just say there's a trend that the people are having increased scores for both quality of life and social participation. Social participation is actually a much larger trend in that positive direction. Okay. Excuse me. So this is also looking at the secondary outcomes that we're looking at. That's what the quantitative data is all about, is the secondary outcomes. So this is showing the people we had 12 people who did the baseline assessments, and then we had about half that did the post-assessments. So we wanted to look at, are there any differences between the individuals who did and did not complete the post data? And what we found was kind of interesting. We found that the people who didn't complete the post assessments, all of them had a paid work history, and all of them lived with their family. With the people who did complete the post assessment, all of them had education past high school, and most of them lived within their communities, either independently or in different types of living facilities where they were fairly independent. And that the trend was that those individuals had higher cognitive functioning. So it's interesting. All of this will be written up and published, so you'll be able to read more in depth when there's time to look at that. So, qualitative analysis. So those 4 individuals did 30 to 45-minute interviews with our qualitative scientists. And some of the questions that were asked were, why did you decide to participate? And the common theme was that the individuals needed job search resources. And another reason is we did offer a small amount of compensation via gift cards. So each time a person, a job seeker, would come in and do, say, the baseline assessments, the post assessments, the interviews, they would get a gift card for $25 to $30 for their time, because they were coming in and spending a couple of hours with the research team, so their time is valuable. So we compensated them for that, and they all said that was an incentive. We did hear that the process is pretty overwhelming, and it's a lengthy process. So anyone who's familiar with customized employment, we assume that it would take approximately 4 to 6 months for people to complete the full process from discovery all the way through placement. We found that it was moving closer to the 8 to 9 months. And the reason for that is it's mostly scheduling. People couldn't get their schedules together and be able to meet out in the communities and things like that. So that tended to stretch the time out. So we're working on finding ways to facilitate shortening that process a little bit. They indicated that they'd like increased one-on-one time with practitioners, and one person in particular said that the individualization is a very refreshing approach. Okay. So the practitioners were also interviewed. 3 practitioners. We ended up bringing on another practitioner once the one person said she could only accept 2 referrals. So we interviewed the 3 people. They all said that Access fills a needed gap in the field, that it's individualized and client-centered, that it's important to standardize and operationalize customized employment as a process. They appreciated the fact that they had a part in, all the stakeholders had a part in sharing information to help improve the process, the protocol, the different templates that are utilized. And they said some of the challenges were developing the person-centered team. Sometimes it was challenging to find people who could participate on those. Scheduling was the biggest issue, especially when there were larger teams. The length of the process, participant motivation, and the vocational rehabilitation counselors, when they were involved, they need more training. Okay. So some of the additional things that we looked at, we kept activity logs, and for the discovery benchmark, we say that there's a minimum of 20 hours that has to be spent in direct discovery activities. The average time in discovery for our practitioners, for the 5 people who went through that process, was 27.7 hours. And like I said before, actually all 5 of those people, 5 of the 7 people, obtained employment outcomes. 1 person passed away. So the lesson learned. One thing that we learned through our recruitment and through getting feedback from individuals the recruitment group, one thing that we learned is that we've been using person's first language and talking about person's first language for a long time now. And particularly in the autism community, identity first language is often preferred. We learned that a lot of people with autism they want to be recognized for who they are and all their characteristics. And they also don't necessarily like the puzzle pieces that have tended to brand autism. So keep that in mind when you work with people with autism. You might want to make sure that you're asking for that individual's preference. Understanding and expectations is very, very important when you're going into the customized employment process with an individual, that they understand that it's going to be a lengthy process. They understand what to expect, and that you clarify the roles and responsibilities of the different parties so that everybody is on the same page. We've added a work motivation assessment to make sure that this is addressing that comment from the practitioners that some of the people were not motivated, that maybe a parent or a family member wanted them to participate, but they were not intrinsically motivated to go to work, which can impact that for sure. Attrition, we had that practitioner issue that I mentioned, and that's going to happen in the real world. So we need to look into, making sure that we have backup situations for those individuals. If it's not working with the practitioner, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the process. It might be just a misconnect between the person and the practitioner. And the length of the customized employment process. Implications for policy and practice. So we know, as I mentioned earlier, we need an evidence-based, user-friendly customized employment process for consistent implementation of customized employment services across states as required by the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. One of the things that we definitely need are highly qualified practitioners. It's not that we don't have them out there. We have many, many really, really talented people working with as employment specialists, but there are some issues. There's a lot of turnover within these agencies and organizations, whether it be the public VR system, private VR system, community-based provider agencies. The turnover is just incredible. So that creates capacity issues. Another issue that's probably contributing to the turnover is the caseload size. A lot of practitioners have so many people, it's very hard to, we talk about it being a lengthy process. Well, a lot of times it's because they have so many people that they're working with at a time that they can't schedule as regularly as should be. So there are some issues that we need to look at. Job retention services, as I mentioned before, they need to be added to the process because we put all this time, energy, and effort and funding and resources into going through this process and helping individuals to find competitive integrative employment opportunities that match their talents and interests, but then don't provide the sufficient post-employment services to make sure that these people continue to work in these jobs and don't have some small issue that could have been remedied, cause them to quit or be fired. So, and this is for a whole different session, but there are a lot of things that we need to focus on in terms of building a better system, to help retain these qualified practitioners and make sure that we can build capacity to be able to serve individuals. There are more people who need services than we have qualified practitioners to meet that need. Okay. So here's some good news about access in terms of the community at large. As we develop an evidence base for this process, as I mentioned, access is the customized employment process protocolized. So it is a system for implementing the customized employment process with fidelity to the model. And it was designed to be very user-friendly. There are templates. We utilized feedback from experts throughout the country, job seekers, practitioners, families, all different types of stakeholders to develop templates that make it easy for a person to go through the whole customized employment process, from discovery all the way through post-employment services in a very structured and comprehensive manner so that pieces aren't left out, so that they're not trying to think about what they're supposed to do next. It just walks the person through, and it, in the end, we want it to be all linked to the protocol that gives more information. So say the individuals in the field, the practitioners in the field, and they're working on a component of this access model, this system, and they aren't sure, they can't quite remember exactly what they should do with a step. They'll be able to click right on that particular element and it will take them directly to the spot in the protocol where it will explain that more in depth so that they can make sure that they're doing each step with fidelity to the model. We're also putting together a website which will be basically, it will be connected to the Florida Center for Inclusive Communities, which is a university center for excellence in developmental disabilities. It's part of the University of South Florida. I am a formal affiliate, and our website will have its own unique URL, but it will also link to those additional resources. And luckily, through that particular resource, we're able to provide technical assistance, not just the information and the templates, but technical assistance. So now this is in the future, but once this website is up and running, all of the resources will be free. So all the access templates and forms, we are developing information and training videos for all stakeholders. So the job seekers and their families can watch an information video to help them to understand what to expect and to visualize this process instead of just having it spoken to them or having information presented to them in writing. A lot of people are visual learners, so this will be helpful for that. We want to have on-demand online training for VR professionals, both practitioners and community-based rehabilitation agencies, and the public VR system. We want to have videos for them that help them to better understand the customized employment process and their role in that process. We've done a lot of training, particularly in Florida. We've done a lot of training with VR counselors, but there's a lot of turnover in the field, as I mentioned. And so those who haven't received that information are coming in without it. And so we want to have something that they can just go on to the website and click a button and complete it and then get their a certificate of completion. Okay? And as I mentioned, we have technical assistance available through the Florida Center for Inclusive Communities, which I think is a very, very important component. So next steps. As I mentioned, we're currently in phase 2, which is a randomized controlled trial, meaning that the individuals are recruited, they complete all the baseline information, and then they are either assigned to the treatment group or a control group. The treatment group goes ahead with the access intervention right away. The control group waits 6 months before they receive the intervention. Not necessarily always the best way, but as I mentioned before, this is the gold standard in terms of rigorous research. So we're looking into other models for testing with other populations that don't require people to be put on hold for 6 months, because we feel that if a person's motivated to work, we don't want to put them on hold. So at the bottom there, you see that we are looking to test the access model with veterans with spinal cord injuries. This will help us to determine the generalizability of the access protocol and the intervention with a different population with a different type of complex disability. And within that study, we are actually going to be utilizing mixed methods. We are going to use 2 different sites. It's not really considered a multiple baseline because there are only 2 sites and not 3 or more, but we are looking at the Tampa VA and the Richmond VA so that we can see if we have similar results in the 2 different facilities. Okay. Another thing that we're trying to do is to do a larger study where we have enough of a sample size to be able to actually get a statistical significant effect size. We need to be able to power that by having a much larger sample size than the 10 for the open trial and then 15 for the randomized control trial, and this, which is considered somewhat, this current study is more of a pilot type of study to see if it works before they put more money into looking at a larger group. And when we do that, we're going to recruit representative samples from underrepresented groups, including oversampling females again, minorities, people with low socioeconomic status, and Spanish-speaking individuals, since Florida has a high percentage of individuals who are Spanish-speaking. We want to make sure that we're reaching out to everybody. So this is our contact information. If you need to get in touch with me or any of our research team, we have email addresses here. There is a website. You can see there at the bottom, and the phone number will actually send you to Devaney Ching, a research assistant, who can put you in touch with me if you'd like to speak with me. Best way to reach me is through that smithtj@usf.edu. Here are references, and thank you so much for your time today. Have a wonderful day.